Stay connected. Make sure you hit the subscribe button.
Hello, I'm Sharon Stevens, a volunteer for the McGraw Historical Society, and I'm here today with Mary Kimberly, who's the village historian, and we're on the grounds of the McGraw High School, which was also the site back in the mid-1800s of the New York Central College. And Mary and I have worked on a walking trail up to the college cemetery.
The walking trail's been there for a long time, and many people in the area have not even known about it. Because it's on the school property, Sharon and I have worked with the school board, and the school board has been very cooperative. The men from the school bus garage have kept it mowed and made the trail easy walking by putting mulch on it. The Boy Scouts have helped put benches in place.
And they helped plant the signs that we did this summer. We did signage.
The guys from the bus garage did.
Informational signs to tell the people that walk to it about the college.
And we've had donations, financial donations towards the expenses, so that's been nice also. It's beginning to be better known in the village, in the area, and people are interested in coming for tours, or they can walk on their own and see the 4 informative signs that are there. It gives them an idea of what it's all about.
And they're going to incorporate the information into the curriculum in the McGraw schools, which is nice too. Mrs. McCool has been very supportive.
Yes. So we're pleased about that.
This White House over here on Academy Street across from the high school is the last structure surviving on New York Central College. It's a building that is commonly referred to as the Farmhouse. It's a rental property now, but at the time the college was here, it housed some workers for the farm and some of the male students. And as I said, it's the last surviving structure of the New York Central College.
The White House down on the corner. During the time the college was open, Isaac Palmer lived there, and he taught agriculture here at the college, but he also was in charge of the crops that were in the field behind the house. Probably they grew corn, possibly some vegetables, I don't know. There was a barn up here near the main building, and we're not sure exactly what that house, if the cows were here, or maybe they were down behind the farmhouse. Unfortunately, the house currently is not in good condition, but it's one of the last remnants of the college.
Well, we're here today in McGraw at the new New York Central College walking trail. It's a trail of about a quarter mile up to the burial grounds for the New York Central College. We're here at sign number 1. Mary Kimberly, the McGraw historian, is here today as well, and she and her husband Carl kind of spearheaded the whole focus on New York Central College and have done a great deal of research over the years. But to go back to sign number 1, you'll see at the very top there's a large picture of the college. This is the main building of the New York Central College. It was founded by some abolitionists and the American Free Baptist Missionary Society in 1848. Unfortunately, it closed in 1860, largely due to economic reasons, but we'll come to that further on the walk. The school was the first university in the country to hire black professors. And they did it in 1848, 100 years before Oberlin College, the preeminent university associated with black education at the time. They did it 100 years before Oberlin did. It was a groundbreaking endeavor. The school was a progressive school in nature, even though it was founded by religious folks. It admitted black and white students, men and women, and they educated them together in the same classrooms with the same curriculum. Some schools at the time admitted women, but they did not educate them with the same curriculum. So New York Central College was in the forefront of abolitionism, equal rights, sexual rights, and it's amazing that it was here in McGraw. And Mary and I just want more people to be aware of it. The photo here is the only known picture, or the only picture that we know of the campus as a whole. And the main building that we saw on picture number 1 is down here in the background. And then over here is a white building that was a combination of the girls' dormitory and the dining room and the kitchens. They could feed, it was 150 people at one time in the dining room. So those were the main structures of the college. There was also a small building called the Farmhouse, and that still exists across the street from the McGraw High School. It housed some staff for the farm that the college operated, and students had to work on the farm, as well as a few of the male students. There's no buildings existing now for New York Central College except that farmhouse and the burial ground that we're going to walk up to today. Why McGraw? Why was it located here in McGraw? I don't know, Mary, you want to talk about that?
This map of New York State shows where McGraw is, right in the center. And it was a good location, being centralized. It was a small area, population about 500 residents at the time when Garrett Smith was planning this college, and this is where he wanted it located.
And he donated $50,000 to acquire the 167 acres that the college took up.
He and the other group from Hamilton, and Horace Greeley, the newspaper man, met in the Baptist church here in the village, and it was kind of like a public hearing. They came to present their concept of mosquitoes, concept of what type of college they wanted to have. And unfortunately, the church clerk was also the postmaster, and he kept all the church records along with these minutes in his safe at the post office. The post office was robbed, the safe was gone, and we have no idea what conversations took place. But apparently it was approved, because about 2 or 3 days later in the local newspaper there was an ad, wanted carpenters, bring your tools and meet over on this property that we have in the village. And they started building immediately.
We might add too that those 500 people that lived in McGraw, they also raised money to bring the college here. They raised $12,000, which is quite a lofty sum in those days. So it was a combination of being centrally located, the locality for the most part wanting it here, and being a rural setting so that the students didn't have too many distractions, even though the rail line came to Cortland, so that the instructors and the students could make their way to Cortland via rail and then come to McGraw via wagon or coach. Okay, we're at the sign number 2 on the New York Central College walking trail, and this sign talks a little bit about the reason for the founding of the college, which we kind of covered down below. But there's a picture of Garrett Smith here. Garrett Smith was a preeminent abolitionist who was very, very wealthy. He was a major property owner in New York State, and he put his money where his mouth is, as I like to say. He gave to a lot of different causes regarding abolition, and this school was one of them. And he helped it through financial turbulence over the years of its existence. He did as much as he could to make the school succeed. Down below we have some information about the 3 black professors that were the first to be hired at an integrated university in the United States. The first one was Charles Reason, and he was hired in 1849, and he taught mathematics and French. He went on to have a wonderful career in education after the school closed. He led the effort to integrate the New York City schools and he went on to be president or vice president of some colleges in the South. The next person is George Vachon. We have a etching of him. He was from Pennsylvania, and he was trained to be a lawyer, but because of his race, Pennsylvania would not allow him to take the bar exam. So he came to New York State and he took the bar exam, passed it, and George Vachon was the first black admitted to the bar in New York State. He taught literature and Latin at New York Central College, and he went on to teach at Howard and Alcorn universities. The third gentleman, who we do not have a picture of, is William G. Allen. And William G. Allen was another educated man. He was originally from Virginia. He studied at the college in Oneida that Garrett Smith sponsored. And he was an interesting fellow. He was, one of the things involving him is one of the reasons that the school had some problems. William Allen and one of the white students, Mary King, fell in love, and they became engaged. And while many of the people that supported New York Central College believed in equality of the races, intermarriage at that time, even though it was legal in New York State, was a bridge too far. And Mr. Allen and Mary King went to visit her parents up in Fulton, and her brother organized a riot and marched on the house that they were at, and they were going to kill him. They were going to put him in a spiked barrel, roll him around, and kill him. Luckily, he was warned, and they escaped out the back of the house, and William Allen escaped to Syracuse. Eventually, William Allen and Mary King were married in New York City. They eloped to New York City. They sailed for England, and they never returned to the United States. So even though intermarriage was legal in New York State at that time, it caused a controversy. This was early on in the length of the school, though. It was in 1853, I think it was. So it was well before the school closed, but it left a sour taste. But these were premier intellectuals that New York Central College hired to be the first black professors in the country.
This is sign number 3 along the trail, and this sign is about the students that were here. There were about 1,000 students, white students, about 70 to 75 black students, and all getting equal education here in the classrooms. Bakwa was one of the first black men to write his own book. Paul Lovejoy, who is a professor in University of Toronto, has done a lot of research on him, is continuing to do so at the age of 78, and eventually will publish his book on this gentleman. The Edmondson sisters were very young when they came here. Garrett Smith had helped get them up north. Their mother was considered a slave. Their father was a free slave. So the children were slaves also. These two girls were sold up and down the East Coast from Baltimore to New Orleans. And they were young, maybe 8 to 10 years old. Garrett managed to contact their father, who was living in New York City, and he somehow or other got money together and got them, bought their papers and got them up here. They didn't know their ABCs. They could not read. They didn't know their numbers, but they were educated. They were here 2 years and then went on. Mary Edmonia Lewis, I think she would have been an interesting lady to know. Her background was black and also Native American. That was her makeup. She was here 2 years. She was known as a, quote, wild woman. And her brother came and took her on to Oberlin, where she finished up her education. After she graduated from Oberlin, she wasn't very successful getting anybody interested in buying her pieces.
Well, she was a sculptor.
She was a sculptor. And she was very interested in doing sculpted pieces of the Indians, probably because of her makeup, part of her makeup. Anyways, she moved to Rome, Italy. Of course, lots of marble there, so her source for material was readily available. She became really well known in Europe. Did very well. They apparently didn't care what she was. It was what she did. Her pieces bring a lot of money even today in the market. About 4 or 5 years ago, one of her pieces was sold by Sotheby's in London for about $3 million. So, and also, one of the really small museums near Casanova, history rooms, I guess I would call it, they have a set of hands that she did. We don't know for sure. It might have been Garrett Smith's hands. There's no way of identifying them, but they're beautifully sculpted. Local people came to this college. It wasn't just people from far off, from Vermont or the Caribbean or Scotland. There were also local people. My husband's great-grandparents came here and studied for 1 year. We don't know what they studied. It would have been interesting. Maybe his great-grandmother wanted a little more education than what she was getting in a country school, and so she took advantage of this. Two of the people that come to mind, Asaph Hall he left the college, graduated, and he was an astrologer. And he went to Washington, D.C., and during his studies, he found some moons around Mars. He married a young lady who had taught in the college here, and she moved with him to Washington also. And one of the times he was working on a paper, and he asked her if she would type it up for him. And she asked him how much he would pay her, and he said, "Nothing, you're my wife." And she said, "Fine, I'm not doing it." And she didn't. Benjamin Boseman, a black student, had medical studies, and he became a surgeon. He was one, I think, of about 7 black surgeons during the Civil War. But there were the everyday people who were just interested in getting a little more education and took advantage of this college in the village.
We probably should add that Chester Wickwire, who a lot of people in Cortland know of, he also attended New York Central College.
He and his family lived up on South Hill on a farm, and his sister Mary also came here for a period of time to do studies.
A question that I have for you. When you spoke of Miss Lewis, you said, she decided to go on and go into art, and you said she wasn't successful. Now, if she was able to sell something for $3 million,
well,
how do we define the success?
That was a current sale. She actually did have some benefactors. She went on to study sculpting in Boston, and she had some very influential benefactors who helped market some of her work. But as Mary said, she didn't meet with her great success until she went to Rome. There was a whole body of sculptors in Rome at that time, and through the connections there, she had very famous people come over to Rome and sit to have their image done, and General Grant was one of them. So she did have a fair amount of success. My reading shows that she wasn't a great money manager, though, so she's constantly asking some of her benefactors for more money. So I think maybe she didn't manage her money really well, but she made a fair amount.
She had 2 ladies in Boston that she
Those were
kept
her
in touch
benefactors,
with.
yeah.
Usually it was,
Yeah,
I need some more money.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
She did meet with success. But the $3 million figure that Mary said was a current sale. Her works are cherished now. There's some in the Harvard Museum. There's some in art galleries around the country. This one's very famous. It's Dying Cleopatra, and it's I don't know if this is in Chicago. There's a couple of versions of this.
So in her lifetime, while she was alive, did they praise her work?
Yes, some people did. Some people thought that it was overly romanticized because her work has a very romantic quality to it. It's not realistic looking, although some of the busts that she did a bust of General Shaw, who led the Black Regiment in Massachusetts, that is wonderful. but even to our modern eyes is remarkable. So yes, she was praised, but some critics didn't care for it, like any other artist, really, even now. But she was a character. She had trouble even at Oberlin. Mary didn't mention it, but she was at Oberlin. Some white students accused her of poisoning them. So they kicked her out of school for a while. We're not going to let her graduate. But she fought it. She was feisty. And they recanted what they said, and she was allowed to get her degree.
So being that the students recanted, basically them recanting is basically saying they lied on her?
Yes.
So
She was abrasive. I think Mary would probably agree. She from my reading, she was abrasive, and people, not only her race. I mean, she was black at a time when most of the students at any school were white. But she was probably perceived as arrogant because she was assertive. She stood up for herself. She knew her worth, and I'm sure.
I don't think she got pushed around.
So in reality, she might not have really been, quote unquote, wild at all.
She wasn't wild. She was not wild.
Because what made her get that name of being wild
described her as wild
was the poisoning, and then they found out to have lied on
They
her.
declared her to be wild here. They didn't declare her to be wild at Oberlin.
No.
Oberlin was a much more serious charge. Here they said she was wild, probably because she flaunted some of the rules. But you're right, Tim, that like some of the things that women managers do that are assertive are called something else. The same thing that a man might do isn't accepted from a woman. Imagine in the 1840s and 50s and 60s to be acting like that as a black woman, to see yourself as powerful and have worth. I'm sure she caught a lot of flack for that, and I'm sure that's why she got the term wild. And at Oberlin, she was accused.
She just wasn't going to be pushed around.
If anything, she was more of like a trendsetter.
She was a trendsetter, absolutely. How many black women said, I'm going to be a sculptor, I'm going to go to Boston and study under this world-renowned sculptor, and then go to Rome and have all these dignitaries come to her studio? Not too many.
I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago, a group were cleaning out a huge barn in Chicago, Illinois, and there was this life-size piece, a horse, life-size horse that had been sculpted, and had a lot of graffiti on it, paint, whatever. Pulled it out, cleaned it up, and it was one of her pieces. And eventually, I don't know what university, a university down south or a college down south now has it, but a life-size horse. It must have been really something to carve.
We're here at the New York Central College Cemetery. It's a very small cemetery. Some people would call it a burial ground, with sign number 4. The genesis for this little burial ground was in 1850. There was an outbreak of smallpox at the college, and 2 or 3 students died. I think probably 2, and they buried them here in this burial ground. They founded it and buried them here. This would have been up the hill behind the main building of the college, and there's a letter from a student who helped with that first burial, and it's very, very touching. I'll read it from her letter. The coffin was borne by those only who had attended the sick and set down some distance from the unfinished grave. 'Twas a beautiful space, selected some days ago and destined for the college cemetery on the brow of a hill overlooking a delightful country, the village, college, and building. The words of our president in solemn speech and earnest prayer, as he touchingly alluded to the circumstances and under which we had met, made it indeed a strange and affecting scene. This was from a letter that student Edith Phillips wrote home about the burial. We don't know exactly how many people are buried here. Some of the stones have been separated and knocked over, but at various times I've counted 9 partial and full stones, or 10. So it kind of waxes and wanes what you can see. There's some right on the ground. The reason for the college closing, I think I alluded to it earlier, the primary reason was financial. William Allen at one point was convinced to pay $6,500, and that helped retire the school's debt, but it did nothing to meet their current expenses. There was a financial panic in 1857, and the school had a great deal of difficulty establishing an endowment. One reason why Oberlin still exists today and New York Central College doesn't is that Oberlin was able to establish an endowment. This school never was able to do that. So finances hounded them from the day one of their existence, which was unfortunate. And naturally, being the trendsetter, being the first of your kind, it's sometimes difficult in an era of controversy surrounding race relations to achieve your goals. The other reason or episode that played into the distress that the college has was the marriage between William Allen and Mary King. There was a lot of ill will generated by that, and that caused some hardship as far as fundraising goes. The school had to always justify its existence. I didn't mention at the very first sign that New York State, this was before the era of public education, New York State did issue a charter to the college, but they didn't give any money. So they were totally on their own. If they had been established maybe 20 years later, the state would have gotten some state funding, and it may still have been here. In the 1880s, the building, the beautiful building that we showed at the beginning of this, was auctioned off for lumber. And the Bean brothers bought the lumber, and they built a couple of barns, one of which we have a picture of here. So the lumber went to use.
And this is still standing.
This is still standing, and the second barn is on Route 41 before going east as you approach the village of
It's
McGraw.
on the bean farm.
It's
just
on the
outside.
left-hand side, just before you reach the village. And it used to have the cupola from the top of the main college building on the top of that barn. But that was blown off by Hurricane Agnes, so that no longer exists.
I do have. I have one thing from the main school building. It's a railing, oak. It's probably 10, 12 feet long, and it was found up on the third floor of the barn at the bean farm, way over in the back. It had been all covered up with straw and everything else, and Mr. Volt just hadn't bothered to look over there. He didn't use that floor for anything, and so he called and asked if we would like it, and we said yes, we would love to have it. And it's in the history room, which is at the rear entrance to the library. And as we were bringing it in, my husband said, wouldn't it be interesting to know who was running their hands down that railing as they came from one of the upper floors?
You know, to go back to the school failing, some people would call the fact that the school no longer exists here a failure. On the other hand, it did prove that blacks and whites, men and women, could be educated together cohesively in the same classrooms with the same curriculum. It proved that black professors could serve as professors and educate blacks and whites. And they did it very well. The people that were educated here and the professors here went on to have amazing careers. So in that sense, it was not a failure because it was the first of its kind, and it did prove the premise. And that premise, or that concept, was implemented later on successfully by schools down the road in the future. They took those concepts and ran with them, and they succeeded, where New York Central College doesn't exist. I think it's important, though, for us to remember the amazing accomplishment that these people that worked here and founded this school made. And unfortunately, their story has been largely forgotten. And that's the reason that we made a documentary and we did the walking trail, so that more people will become aware of this really fascinating story and be proud of the legacy that New York Central College leaves to us. And maybe learn from some of the lessons as well, because there are echoes of the things that haunted the school in the 1850s and 60s today.
Stay connected. Make sure you hit the subscribe button.